You want to hear a ghost story? I'll tell you mine in just a moment. Before I do, would you please like, follow, leave a comment, and share this video? It really does help the algorithm find more really great people just like you. Thanks. So 34 years ago, in the summer of 1992, I moved to New York City. And I started out by subletting a couple of different apartments around the city. One of them was from my friend Beth Glover, who lived in a beautiful brownstone building in Brooklyn. She lived there with two roommates, and they had the entire house to themselves. It was stunning. And Beth was going to be away for the summer doing summer stock, and her roommates were going to be away as well, but Beth was the only one who was going to sublet her portion of the house. So for 2 months I lived there. For $400 a month, I had this glorious, beautiful house all to myself. And while I was there, Beth asked me if I could forward the mail that came for her, if I could send that to her address and wherever it was she was performing. I said, yes, of course. And then she asked if I could water the garden. There was this lovely backyard with a garden and a little patio area to sit and enjoy the evenings. And I just thought, I am living the life. And then one day out in the garden, I heard some clinking noises coming from the kitchen. The window was just above me, facing the garden. And it sounded like utensils and dishes and whatever. And my first thought was, oh, one of the roommates must be home. So I went in the house fully planning to introduce myself and say, hey, I'm subletting from Beth. But there wasn't anybody there. I looked all over the place and there was nothing. And the kitchen noises would happen virtually every time I was in that garden. And then I started noticing in different parts of the house, I would be walking through a room and I would pass through a cloud of like rose petal perfume, something just like a cloud. And I thought, what's that? And I immediately was looking for like a plug-in or something like a room deodorizer. There was nothing. They didn't even have like Glade spray or any of that stuff. Nothing like that in the house. I thought, what is that? Where's that smell coming from? It wasn't unpleasant. It was actually very nice, but I couldn't figure it out. And it was happening on the staircase. It was happening in the living room, in the dining room, down by my bedroom. And I was very confused, and I started to get a little freaked out. So I called Beth, and I said, this is going to be an odd question, but have these things happened to you? And Beth said, oh yeah, that's Sarah. I said, that's Sarah? Who's Sarah? And she said, well, we think that she was someone that worked as a domestic servant in the house. And she said, she must feel comfortable around you if she's doing this. And I was like, well, good for Sarah. And she said, you might just want to tell her, look, it's okay if you're here. Just please don't show yourself to me. And I said, has she done that? And apparently, I guess the roommates had caught glimpses of somebody, a young woman, in the house. So I took Beth's advice. I talked to Sarah every day. I said, you know, I respect your right to be here. I just hope that you don't show yourself to me because that would scare me. And of course, I never did see her, but the noises in the kitchen sort of subsided, and the perfume happened a couple of times, but I think she kind of took a step back from whatever she was doing. And these were real experiences. These were things I could not explain, that my senses were telling me these things were happening. I was not imagining them. I was not dreaming them. I was not doing drugs. I was not fantasizing anything. They were actual, stimuli around me. And I dropped a line to Beth earlier today to say, hey, I don't know if you'll remember our conversation about this. And I brought it up again. And she said, oh, yes, of course I remember. Because part of me thought, did I imagine all of that? I had written about it in my journal. And so I found the story again when I was going through journals looking for interesting stories to tell here. And when I came across this story about Sarah, I had to go to Beth and say, this did happen, right? And she said, oh yeah, we all had experiences with Sarah. And what she added to the story this time, which she may have told me at the time, I don't remember, but apparently the people that owned the brownstone that they were renting from knew sort of the history of the house and said that there was a domestic servant who had died, a young woman who had died in a kitchen fire in that house. And then a priest who was a friend of somebody connected to the family knew even more history about it and said that the woman's name was actually Harriet. So who knows? But Harriet, Sarah, whoever, I hope you're at peace wherever you are. And I just thought it was an interesting story to tell because it's the one and only real paranormal experience I've ever had that I cannot explain. And there you have my ghost story. Thank you for being here and for putting up with this. I hope it was interesting for you. Have you had any experiences? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about them. I will see you on the next one. Love you lots. Bye-bye.